After my husband cheated and left me to marry my sister, my own family made it a point to make my life miserable, going as far as to make me lose custody of my kids to send them away to my childless sister. Now I'm marrying into a wealthy family while sister and ex-husband's life is falling apart, and they're suddenly coming back to apologize. I always knew something felt off, but I never imagined my husband and my own sister would be the ones to rip my life apart. You know how people say you can sense when someone starts pulling away? Yeah, I felt that. I just didn't realize I was being slowly pushed off a cliff while they stood there smiling, pretending to care. We'd been married for almost 7 years. We had 2 kids together before we married. Life wasn't perfect, but we had a routine, a rhythm that made me believe we were doing all right. He was the logical one, the planner. I was the emotional backbone, always rushing around for the kids, late nights, prepping for school events, grocery lists, bills, and PTA meetings. I thought he appreciated how much I carried, but apparently he didn't want a wife who was busy with kids. He wanted someone who made him feel wanted, desired, and apparently that someone was my younger sister. It started small. I noticed he began texting a lot when we were together. He'd lock his phone. He started working late more often. My sister, who used to visit once in a while, began showing up nearly every week, always under the guise of helping with the kids. I thought she just liked being involved. And in my desperation to keep my head above water, I let her. Turns out she was already involved, just not in the way I thought. The truth slapped me in the face one evening when I came back early from a grocery run and walked in on the 2 of them in my kitchen, not touching, but the silence was too tight, the air too heavy, and their expressions, well, guilt doesn't lie. My husband looked like a deer in headlights. My sister just looked smug. At first, they denied it. They gaslit me, told me I was being paranoid, that I was just stressed, overworked. But I wasn't stupid. I started putting things together. The late nights, her lipstick in his car, the way our kids would mention how Auntie stayed over again when I wasn't home. Eventually, he admitted it, not because he felt guilty, but because he wanted out. He said he was tired of pretending, that he'd fallen in love with her, that she made him feel alive again. And the worst part? My family sided with him. My mother called me hysterical and selfish for not being more understanding. She said these things happen, that if my sister was truly in love with him, who was I to stand in the way of that? My father, who had always been more reserved, just told me not to make things harder for everyone. That maybe this was a sign I needed to refocus my life. I was still trying to process the fact that the man I built a life with had just walked out and he was dragging my own blood with him. But what gutted me wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing I didn't have a single person in my corner. They went ahead and got married within a few months after the divorce. My family held an actual wedding for them. My own mother wore a silver gown and smiled in every photo next to my ex-husband like she'd never once been part of my marriage to him. My sister wore an off-white dress, the same exact shade I had worn years ago when I married him. I couldn't make this stuff up. They invited my kids to be part of the wedding party. And when I said no, when I dared to draw a boundary, that's when everything shifted. My mother claimed I was being bitter and using my kids to punish them. My father said I was being emotional and would calm down once I stopped acting like a jilted high schooler. They weren't just siding with them. They were making their own story and painting me as the villain. When I didn't cave, they retaliated in the worst way possible. I didn't have the financial means at the time to fight a full custody battle. My ex-husband did, thanks to his tech job and my parents' support. And they backed his claim that I was emotionally unwell and unstable. That the kids were better off with a stable home, meaning him and my sister. I fought, God, I fought. But the system doesn't always care about the truth. When you're the one barely staying afloat, I lost primary custody. The kids were handed over to the people who broke me. And just like that, I was cut out of the only life I had ever known. The weeks that followed felt like I was drifting through someone else's nightmare. The house felt too big, too quiet. I'd stare at my phone, willing someone to reach out, to tell me this wasn't okay, that what they did wasn't normal. But no one did. My own blood decided that a picture-perfect narrative mattered more than the daughter they raised. I remember my mother's exact words the last time I saw her: maybe if you had made more of an effort in your marriage, none of this would have happened. So I left. Not just emotionally, but physically. I packed up what little pride I had left and moved to the city. I found a job, a crappy little apartment, and tried to put myself back together. Every step felt like dragging dead weight behind me. But I kept going. I didn't know it then, but that rock bottom was going to be the foundation I rebuilt everything on. Update 1. I didn't realize how quiet life could get until the sound of my kids' footsteps disappeared from my home. I used to wake up to the shuffle of socks against hardwood, their soft giggles sneaking into my room before sunrise, and the chaotic clatter of cereal bowls being dragged from the lowest kitchen shelf. That noise used to drive me crazy when I was sleep-deprived and stressed, but now I'd have given anything to hear it again. I was allowed visitation, but not without conditions, supervised, limited hours, and always with someone from his side present, usually my sister. They claimed it was to ensure neutrality. I knew it was just another way to humiliate me. The first time I visited them after the ruling, I barely recognized my own children, not because they looked different, but because they acted like strangers. They called her Mommy B, short for her name. And when my son tried to run into my arms, she cleared her throat and reminded him not to be rude, that I wasn't really the full-time parent anymore. I swallowed that moment like glass. I held myself together that entire visit. I smiled, played, and read them their favorite books. I packed small snacks I knew they loved, the ones she used to roll her eyes at. And when I walked back to my car after those agonizing 2 hours, I screamed. Not out loud, just inside. One long, aching scream that felt like it was going to rip a hole through my chest. They had taken everything, and they were still acting like I should thank them for keeping the peace. The weeks turned into months. I tried to keep up with the visitation, but every time I saw my kids, it felt like being invited to a birthday party where everyone else was part of a secret joke I wasn't allowed to know. They always wore coordinated outfits. Their hair was cut and styled the way she liked it. And my daughter once told me she wasn't allowed to bring the bedtime bear I got her because Mommy B says it smells like sadness. You can't argue with kids. Not when they're that young. Not when they're being taught to see you as a guest in their life. And it wasn't just them. It was the entire support system around them. Teachers stopped calling me in on school events. Medical appointments were held without notifying me. Parent-teacher meetings happened without me even knowing they were scheduled. Every time I tried to assert my rights, they reminded me that technically I had none beyond standard visitation. I thought maybe time would help, that maybe as the months went by, the kids would start asking about me more, wanting to spend time with me. But the opposite happened. They were being fed this picture of a new, complete family. And I didn't fit into that frame. I was the bitter shadow in the corner, the woman who couldn't let go and move on. And believe me, I tried. I got therapy. I found a steady job. I even made a few new friends in my city. It was a couple of hours away from where I previously lived. How did I move? Well, I did get a settlement in the divorce. He cheated, after all. I tried dating again, though nothing ever really stuck. Not when every connection I made felt like a betrayal of the life I'd spent years trying to protect. Still, I kept showing up for my kids, even when I wasn't invited. Birthdays, holidays, random Tuesday visits when I knew they had games or school recitals from the other moms. They were the only ones who didn't warm up to Mommy B. I'd sit in the back, clapping quietly, pretending not to see the way she glared at me like I was trespassing. My ex-husband once had the audacity to pull me aside and say he admired my dedication, that I should think about getting involved in community work instead, something fulfilling. As if being a mother wasn't supposed to be fulfilling enough. My breaking point came on my daughter's 8th birthday. I wasn't invited. I knew the party was happening. One of the moms from her school had reached out to me in confusion, asking if I'd be there. I wasn't. I had to watch from across the street, standing behind a line of parked cars as my daughter laughed and danced in a garden full of balloons and presents. She looked happy, genuinely happy, and that crushed me more than anything else ever could. Not because I wanted her to be miserable, but because I realized she was forgetting me. Slowly, gently, she was learning a version of love that didn't include me at all. I left a small gift on their porch that evening, a handmade bracelet, a card, and a photo of the 3 of us from her 3rd birthday. I didn't even sign it. I just placed it there and walked away. I didn't get a thank you. I didn't get a text, but a few days later, I saw her wearing the bracelet in a photo posted by my sister on Facebook. No caption, just a perfect little family photo. My ex-husband, my sister, and our kids. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't mentioned. I didn't exist. And that's when it really hit me. I was no longer their mother in anyone's eyes but my own. But I wasn't done. Not yet. They could take my kids, my marriage, even my day-to-day presence, but they couldn't erase who I was. I wasn't going to let them. Not without showing them exactly what kind of woman they tried to discard. Update 2. The funny thing about trauma is that it doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just sits there, silently, rearranging inside you until nothing feels like home anymore. That's what those months felt like. I existed in a shell of a life where people around me acted like I was the villain for being betrayed. My ex-husband and my sister did what they did, but somehow I was the one being treated like I had brought shame to the family. No one called them out. No one asked how I was sleeping or eating or if I needed help getting back on my feet. All I got were pitying looks from distant relatives and passive-aggressive remarks from my parents that felt more like sharp little knives. I moved cities because I needed distance, emotional, physical, psychological. I didn't want to run into them at grocery stores or risk seeing my kids on weekends only to have my sister call last minute and cancel for schedule conflicts. I wanted a clean break, but yes, I still traveled to visit them. I picked the city because I had no memories there, no history, just a chance, better opportunity. I got a job with a real estate agency, starting as an assistant. The pay wasn't great, but I was determined. I took online classes after work, earned certifications, and slowly worked my way up. And within a year, I was closing deals and making enough to stop living paycheck to paycheck. Within 2, I had my own clients, my own listings, and a reputation for being tough but fair. Then came the turning point. I met him. He was nothing like my ex. Quiet confidence, steady, respectful. He didn't ask about my past right away. He let me unfold at my own pace, never rushing, never pushing. When I finally did tell him the story, he didn't pity me. He just listened, and he stayed. His family was warm in ways I didn't know I needed. His mother hugged me the first time she met me and told me I had kind eyes. His father made dad jokes that were terrible but genuine. They welcomed me into their home and into their family like I was always meant to be there. No measuring up, no reminders of who I used to be. When he proposed, it wasn't grand or dramatic. It was quiet, over coffee on a rainy Sunday morning, and it felt more right than anything had in years. By the time we started planning our wedding, I had regained partial custody of my kids after a long legal fight. The kids were older now and had started voicing their preferences to the court. It helped that I could provide a stable home, that I had a strong financial record, and that I was no longer the woman my family tried to paint as too broken. Now, here's the kicker. Just a few weeks after my fiancé and I got engaged, I got a message from my sister. It was subtle at first, a casual "hey, it's been a long time" kind of text. I ignored it. Then came another, and eventually she asked to talk. I didn't respond. Next came my ex. He called, then sent an email saying he had regrets and wanted to talk about how things went down. That part nearly made me laugh. He said he heard I was engaged and that he was genuinely happy for me. Sure, he was. I didn't respond to him either. Then my mother called, and that surprised me more than anything. I stared at her name on my screen for a solid 5 minutes before finally declining the call. She left a voicemail saying she missed me and wanted to rebuild what we lost. She didn't mean what she did. She didn't acknowledge how she treated me, how she sat on the wrong side of that courtroom, or how she helped rip my kids out of my arms. She just said she wanted to be part of my life again. At that moment, I realized they weren't reaching out because they felt bad. They were reaching out because they had seen me win. I was happy, successful, and surrounded by people who loved me, and they wanted in on it. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Update 3. A couple of weeks after my engagement was officially announced, I noticed a subtle but steady shift in how my family began to behave. It was one of those changes you only catch if you've had enough distance to spot the contrast. I suddenly became the daughter, the sister, the cousin they were all proud of. And every interaction came wrapped in this hollow layer of sugary politeness I didn't ask for. My mother, who hadn't spoken to me without a raised voice in nearly 2 years, now called every 3 days. In her voicemails, she claimed she was just checking in, trying to sound casual, but her voice always lingered longer than necessary when I mentioned anything about the wedding. I texted her that I was busy with the wedding prep. If I said the venue, she'd say she was familiar with it. If I mentioned the guest list, she'd pretend like she had suggestions, always waiting for me to ask her to get involved. I didn't, not once. I was just playing around with how much information I gave her. I didn't speak to her on calls, only texts. I kept my circle small, my bridal planning even smaller. My future mother-in-law had taken me like a second daughter. And unlike what I'd seen growing up, her love didn't come with conditions. There was no scorecard, no weighing what I gave against what I received. It was just genuine affection, support, and presence. She never tried to win me from my biological family. She simply showed up in a way they never had. Still, it was strange when I ran into my cousin at a boutique and she cornered me by the mirror with a painfully forced smile. She said that she was really sorry about how everything happened back then and that family doesn't always get it right on the first try. I asked her flatly what she was referring to, just to see if she had the spine to say it out loud, but all she did was stammer and trail off. Then she changed the subject to my engagement ring and started complimenting the cut. She didn't have her own house in the city. I think she was staying with a friend, so I guess she was desperate enough to track me down. That became a pattern over the next few weeks. Apologies that weren't really apologies. Conversations where people circled around the subject, hoping I'd be the one to extend the lifeline and let them save face. But I had no interest in being their redemption arc. The final straw came when my father showed up outside my workplace. I hadn't seen him in person since the whole custody mess, nor had I spoken to him. He'd been the most adamant that the better environment for the kids was with my sister. And now here he was, standing near the entrance, awkwardly wringing his cap in his hands like he didn't know whether to knock or wait. He said that he'd been thinking a lot about things and realized maybe they had been too quick to judge. I let him speak, not because I wanted to hear it, but because I needed to see if he was capable of saying anything without turning it back on me. He wasn't. He ended his little speech by asking if I was willing to let bygones be bygones, especially now that things were going well for me again. His tone made it clear that this wasn't about making things right. It was about him not wanting to be left out of the success story he never thought I'd write. I didn't argue. I just told him it was too late. I didn't even have time to process that encounter when 2 days later I got a call from my ex-husband. I stared at the screen in disbelief. I almost let it ring out, but the kids were with him last week. He had picked them up when my fiancé was home, so I let him handle it. I was wondering if he called to change the schedule. He started by saying my name like he was trying to jog some forgotten bond, like we were old school friends instead of the train wreck we had actually been. He asked how I was doing and I said I was fine. He paused as if he was waiting for me to ask the same. And when I didn't, he jumped into a story about how things had been rough lately. My sister, his now wife, had lost her job. They were struggling financially. He mumbled something about hoping to see the kids more. And then he said it. He said he was sorry for how things went down between us, that he regretted a lot of it, and that maybe we could talk in person, just the two of us, to find closure. I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it burst out of me. I told him I was glad he finally realized what he threw away, but I wasn't looking for closure. I had already closed that chapter so tightly, it had no room to breathe. I said that if he needed help, he should turn to the woman he gave up his family for. That he didn't get to come crawling back just because his backup plan fell through. I ended the call and muted his number. Later that night, I got a message from my sister. She had the audacity to say that she was sorry for everything and hoped we could all be a family again. I didn't even respond. There are some bridges you burn and then salt the ashes. My fiancé walked into the room a few minutes later and saw the look on my face. He didn't press. He just sat down beside me, held my hand. I realized then how much had changed. I was no longer someone waiting to be chosen by people who never respected me. I had built a life they didn't see coming. And they were only sorry now because they saw what they missed out on. I wasn't bitter. I was free. And no apology in the world was going to change the fact that they only wanted me now because they had nothing else left. Update 4. It was a quiet morning when I got the email. I had just finished my tea and was sitting on the balcony watching the world do its thing. People hurrying off to work. The neighbor's dog chasing birds. The wind making the leaves dance like they didn't owe anyone a thing. My phone pinged. It was from a family group thread that had been long dead. One I didn't even remember I was still part of. Subject line, reunion planning. Let's bring the family together again. I didn't even flinch. I clicked. It was my cousin sending out a cheerful message about how it had been too long since everyone was under one roof and how this year's reunion should be a time to heal, reconnect, and celebrate how far we've all come. There were attachments, old family photos, a tentative schedule, even a list of people expected to attend. My name was on that list, and so was my sister's. Right at the top, her name was in bold. The message ended with a special note from my mother who said she hoped I'd consider showing up because family doesn't always make the right decisions, but they always come back together in the end. She signed it with her full name. Not even Mom, just regards. I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled down, read through some of the earlier replies. Most were predictable. My aunts chiming in with potluck ideas, my uncles dropping dry one-liners, pretending to be funny. 1 or 2 people said they'd love to catch up with everyone, and then added my name, as if I'd be enticed by the idea that they were excited to see me now. I shut the laptop and laughed. Not the bitter kind, just tired amusement. Because here was this entire ecosystem that had cut me off, judged me, humiliated me, erased me, and now trying to loop me back in like nothing ever happened. Like I'd simply wandered off, and was being gently summoned home. They didn't realize I'd built a new one. I told my fiancé that evening. He was halfway through making pasta when I leaned against the kitchen counter and read out the message. His expression didn't change. He just kept stirring and then said that I didn't have to go if I didn't want to. No pressure, no assumptions. I told him I didn't want to. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer felt the need to explain myself. These people weren't mine anymore. They weren't owed explanations or performances. I wasn't the version of myself they left behind. And I certainly wasn't interested in sharing a table with my sister. Not when I knew exactly what her presence in that room would mean, her perfect little smiles, her helpless act, her pretending like she didn't steal an entire life and wear it like it fit better on her until it didn't. And everyone would tiptoe around it, act like we were just two women who grew apart, not a woman who ripped apart her sister's family and took the leftovers. Yes, it was my ex's fault, too. The week went by quietly, but the messages didn't stop. My mother left a voicemail, her voice all soft and wounded, telling me she just wanted one photo where her daughters stood together again. I deleted it. Then came the parcel. It was a large envelope, hand-delivered. Inside was a handwritten letter from my father. I didn't read all of it. First few lines were enough to guess the rest. He said that time had made him reflect, that mistakes were made, that I had always been more like him than he realized. And then right there in the middle, he added that he and my mother had been hoping that I might consider reintegrating with the family because they had decided to change their will. There it was, the actual reason. It had nothing to do with closure or love or family bonding. It was about them realizing that the daughter they discarded was now the one who hadn't ruined her life. The one who had built something stable, real, and promising. And they didn't want to be left behind. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and wrote a simple note on top, "Too little, far too late." I didn't send it. I didn't owe them even that. Instead, I wrote a different letter to my younger self. I told her that the day she watched her life fall apart wasn't the end. That even when everyone walked out, she had it in her to keep going. That no matter how many people tried to rewrite her story, she would hold the pen in the end. I told her she didn't need their love because she'd find better. And I told her this: you will not only survive this, but you'll build a life so full that they will look back and realize they were never the center of your story. Just a footnote. The next morning, I RSVP'd to the family reunion. I wrote, "Declined. I already have a family." Edit, I don't care about the will. It isn't like they have much. I have money. My to-be husband has more than enough to feed my entire family and his until they die and more. And I don't need or want anything from them. Update 5. The reunion came and went. Photos circulated, posed smiles, wine glasses raised, the same tired toasts. My sister, of course, was in the center of it all, her arms wrapped around my mother and father, all three of them radiating the illusion of something whole. But there was a quiet hollowness in the background, a space they couldn't fill. Me. A week later, I got one last message from my mother. No greeting, no small talk, just a line that read, "I hope you're happy now." And the truth was, I was. I didn't need them to say sorry anymore. I didn't need the validation they refused to give me when I begged for it. My fiancé and I were planning our wedding. We had just gotten a dog. We had friends who showed up for the small stuff and didn't disappear during the hard days. I finally had peace. And it wasn't fragile, performative peace. It was the kind that came from choosing myself. I heard that my sister's and ex's marriage fell through. That the golden girl's shine didn't last when people started holding her accountable. That my parents were quietly trying to figure out how to reframe the narrative again. How to twist the truth until it sounded like they had always been on my side, just misunderstood. But I let them. Let them rewrite their version. And let them sit in the echo chamber they built for themselves. I wasn't going to shout through it anymore because this wasn't revenge. This wasn't a comeback story. This was just me living a life that didn't need their permission. A life that proved I had always been enough, even when they couldn't see it. And if that made them uncomfortable now, good. Edit, yes, we recently got married.